In case people think that it's just Jumoke and I, there are actually 4 of us, and I have a brother who is in the States. I have a sister who's a dentist in the UK, and both my brother and sister are as accomplished as Jumoke and I. There was no pressure. We grew up in an intellectually stimulating environment. We grew up on the University of Lagos campus. And both my parents come from very solid pedigrees, families that treasure integrity and a good name over everything else, and hard work. My mom, for instance, would have a cold and take Esconade or Contact or whatever and go to work. So my father, I always saw him push himself to be the best that he could. So those were the examples we grew up seeing, and so there was no pressure. It was just something that we just knew we had to do.
Now let's turn our attention to the hard part, the election itself. Your victory is historic, but the election itself remains under intense scrutiny. Your opponents have described it as everything from shambolic to a sham. There are complaints about delayed voting, challenges with OTP failures, inaccessible platforms. There were thousands of lawyers who actually said they were unable to vote. Even one of your opponents said he couldn't vote. Reports also indicate that you yourself also experienced voting difficulties. I don't know how true that is. Can you honestly say this election met the standard that the NBA should be setting for the rest of Nigeria?
No, but not for the reasons that they adduce. First of all, let me start with a general caveat, and I'm going to take some time to answer this question because it's important. Let me say a general caveat. I'm not sure there's any election that's without its difficulties, right? This one had its difficulties. But my opponents would be less than truthful if they didn't acknowledge that we all knew the reasons why those things happened. Thankfully, they are saying less of electoral fraud and more of disenfranchisement, which affected us all. So you see, in the past, there have been allegations of electoral fraud and rigging that nobody has ever been able to establish. I have asked counsel, see, if you say that this thing, I want to know how, when, how did it happen? Nobody has ever really been able to pinpoint. If they say, oh, people voted for other people, nobody has ever come forth to say, I wasn't able to vote because they said I'd voted already. So this time around, there were so many attempts to stop the election from happening through means which were not usual for the election being stopped. And the president of the NBA stood his ground. The ECNBA confirmed that it was ready to conduct the election. But my core contestants insisted that the means by which they had intended to conduct the election was not robust enough to withstand any rigging. And so they insisted that we should include the use of telephone numbers to pass the OTPs to voters, because the emails are subject to manipulation. And so by Wednesday last week, the ECNBA conceded to them and said, we'll use the telephones. They wanted the election to be postponed. And the ECNBA said they were happy to go on Saturday, they would be ready. If the ECNBA said they would be ready, then there was no reason for the elections to be postponed. And so the elections were not postponed. Now, unfortunately, the system came under tremendous attack, a cyber attack that was designed to ensure that it didn't work. Who did what? I have no idea, and I don't speculate. But the system was disabled. It took the mercy of God. It took a miracle for another server to be designed in order to, and that happened, I understand, within 3 hours. A completely different platform was built that had no time to be tested, that started running at 7:35 a.m.
You think there was a sabotage on the system?
Oh, yes, there was. That's the reason why the president of the NBA has come out publicly and said so. It was hacked, and there was nothing that the service providers didn't do to try and get up and running. At the end of the day, they got the wisdom to build a fresh one. And what is unprecedented, they were able to build one within 3-4 hours. And that's what we started using at 7:35 a.m. Now, there were glitches here and there, but it largely withstood the pressure of so many lawyers trying to vote, and it lasted for the entire 24 hours.
Were you able to vote yourself?
Do you know, I actually voted. I actually pressed submit. It was when my co-opponent said that I wasn't able to vote that I realized, and I checked the voters list, I didn't find my name.
So out of the 12,000 votes that got in the election, yours wasn't there?
Apparently, because I actually voted, and luckily for me, I did it with people around me.
Right.
So I was surprised, and I'm hoping that perhaps the fact of getting an OTP and all that would have left a footprint.
You know, I had the former governor of Lagos here yesterday,
Okay.
and I asked him about this election. So I'm hoping that we can play that excerpt to hear his thoughts on electronic voting and what transpired within the NBA.
I tried to vote, and I think in the first attempt at the electronic thing a couple of years back, and it took hours and hours. At the end of the day, the process just became too difficult for me to engage with. Of course, I'm probably from the analog age. So I crave, and I'm sure younger lawyers will not like me saying this, but this is what I'm comfortable with. I crave back those days when we used to vote during the annual general conference. So everybody who comes to the conference is registered and we vote. But of course, there's nothing perfect about that. I'm the first to admit that one of those votes went south in the Port Harcourt conference. So there's nothing perfect. It's actually us at the end of the day. So whether you choose the electronic, whether you choose the manual, whether you choose the digital, whether you do real-time transmission, how do people behave? Where is the sense of sportsmanship and the spirit of concession to say, look, I think Nifemi won this election, let's move on?
Well, I didn't win the election, you did. But he's always been a proponent of there are no perfect elections anywhere.
Yes.
But perhaps NBA will now understand that electoral problem in Nigeria is not a politician thing. Maybe you will calm down now when criticizing government. Do you think there's a sense to which NBA now understands that this is perhaps a problem with the system and that all of us are Nigerians after all?
Well, first of all, I understand the arguments about not having the moral justification to criticize elections when we can't get our house in order. The issues are not exactly apples for apples, right? But I understand that the principle is the same. Nothing will take away our moral justification to be the watchdog of society, and we'll continue to improve on that. We will also continue to improve on our own internal systems. The idea is, once we have the determination to ensure that our systems work and are acceptable to the vast majority of our members, then we would have achieved success, and that won't prevent us from criticizing elections. I told you earlier on that this was not foolproof, it was not flawless, right? But I think that when people say that the election was the worst that we've ever had, no, I completely disagree. We all know the reasons why the election went the way it did. And like I said, thankfully, the allegations of rigging are far less strident than the allegations of disenfranchisement, which affected all of us.
There are bigger allegations, and we're going to talk